Hi. If you're like me and you grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s, then you've probably seen a lot of this, or this in movies. Also, if, like me, you've ever been to a museum to look at old paintings, you've probably seen a lot of this, or this, or this. So, what's the deal here? How do we go from this to this being seen as cool? This is the question we will tackle in this video. And by we, I mean I will talk and probably go on a few tangents while you listen. Part 1. Fairness as beauty. Most ancient civilizations worshipped the sun. Like, the main deity in ancient cultures was usually some kind of sun god. For example, one of the most important gods for the Inca people of South America was the sun god Inti. Likewise, ancient Egyptians worshipped Ra, who literally carried the sun on his head. However, for most of history, pale skin was seen as the epitome of beauty in light-skinned populations of Europe, Asia, and North America. And we can find this beauty ideal in a lot of literature and art from ye olden days. For example, Chinese poetess Li Qingqiao wrote of skin so white that it shines through her red veil. An ancient Japanese proverb says that white skin makes up for 7 defects, meaning that it can hide imperfections. And this beauty ideal still holds true in Asian cultures today, with skin bleaching products unfortunately being a huge industry. Renaissance and Baroque art, whose main goal was to find an excuse to show nudity, to show the beauty of the human body in its purest form, are all about rosy cheeks and light skin. Likewise, famous works of literature by Dante and Goethe all describe the love interest of the protagonist as fair-skinned beauties. As an example, in Goethe's Faust, his most famous play that I totally did read in high school, Gretchen, or the woman that Faust is madly in love with, is described like this. By heaven, the girl is wondrous fair, of all I've seen beyond compare. So sweetly virtuous and pure, and yet a little pert, be sure. The lips so red, the cheeks clear dawn.
And so on and so on.
And, of course, we have Brother Grimm's Snow White, published in 1812, that was known for her skin white as snow, lips red as blood, and hair black as ebony. Yeah, nothing like a bunch of European white guys deciding what feminine beauty is for hundreds of years. Even the word fair, from Old Saxon fagar, used to just mean beautiful or pretty, but expanded to also mean light-skinned or delicate in the 16th century, and later also morally good. So what happened? Where did this tanning trend come from? Is Baywatch single-handedly responsible for making tanned bodies seem so cool? Well, a tan might seem slay today, but back in the day, it was anything but slay. Instead, it meant you were toiling away in the fields all day, pitchforking hay for little to no pay. Okay? In other words, before the 20th century, fair skin and rosy cheeks weren't just considered pretty. They also communicated that you could afford the luxury of sun protection, like parasols, gloves, and wide-brimmed hats. And of course, not having to work.
It's time for me to shake my ass on a yacht.
Sun protective fashion accessories were especially popular during the Victorian era among wealthy women in Western Europe and the US. And we can see this in many paintings from this time, like Woman with a Parasol by Monet, Parasol by Renoir, and A Sunday Afternoon by Seurat. A tan wasn't only a mark of belonging to a lower social class. The glorification of white skin and warnings to stay away from the sun were at least partly racist perspectives. As an example of the attitudes of the time, in a 1905 book titled The Effects of Tropical Light on White Men, Dr. Charles Woodruff labeled sunlight as the cause of mental and physical illnesses. See, germs and bacteria weren't really understood back in ye olden days. So when a bunch of European men succumbed to mysterious diseases after moving to the warmer climates of European colonies, Dr. Chaz blamed the sun. In the book, Dr. Charles goes on and on about how light is a deadly enemy of life and the white man is out of place in the tropics. He also thought that the sun in the US was too strong, saying, "The American girl is a bundle of nerves. She's a victim of too much light." Yikes. And I didn't even get to the part where he goes on a tangent about the Aryan race. So to sum up, in his racist and sexist book, Dr. Charles says that the sun is very bad, and if people refuse to listen to his advice and stay in the shade, they will suffer from a nebulous disease with symptoms like fatigue, memory loss, insomnia, headaches, alcoholism, insanity,
suffering, and so on and so on.
Not all doctors agreed with these wild claims when the book was published. Despite this, and the fact that the book is controversial to say the least, it does give us an insight into how negatively tanning was perceived, both by doctors and by the public. But all of this is about to change. Part 2. A new era of sun worship. The popularity of the tan is often referenced to be a trend set by Coco Chanel. An article from the June 1929 Vogue says that after she came back from a holiday with a tan, she said, "The 1929 girl must be tanned. A golden tan is the index of chic." In reality, the gradual rise in popularity of tanning was an unintended consequence of industrialization. Menial labor moved from agriculture and the outdoors to indoor factory work. A pale complexion went from being a stamp of the parasol-wielding elites to being a marker of the lower-class industrial worker. At the same time, the upper classes spent more time outside, playing sports like tennis and polo. Industrialization also meant that more and more people moved to the city to find work. Urban areas became pretty grimy and polluted with coal smoke, which meant that the working class had even less access to sunlight. Doctors began to diagnose working-class people with so-called diseases of darkness like tuberculosis and rickets, and they believed these illnesses were caused by a lack of sunlight. We can also see this new association of pale skin and sickness in popular fiction from this time, like the vampire in Bram Stoker's Dracula, who is known for his extraordinary pallor. Paleness has since become a defining feature of villains. But hold on a minute. What did the scientists even know about the sun back then? Well, I don't know. I'm but a mere person of fashion and culture. Hold on. Hello? Can you explain the big brain stuff to the audience, please?
You mean the groundbreaking discoveries that shaped the world as we know it today?
Yeah, that. The big words things.
Sure. You're welcome. Okay, let's talk about sunlight.
Maybe you associate the sun with UV radiation. However, the sun doesn't just emit UV rays. The wavelengths that reach Earth, or those that aren't absorbed by the atmosphere, fall in the infrared, visible, and UV spectrum, as we can see here. But since UV rays are kind of more relevant for us because they directly produce a tan, I'm just going to focus on them for now. Since humans can't see the UV part of the spectrum, scientists were kind of perplexed about these mysterious rays for a very long time. That is, until a German dude by the name Johann Ritter showed up. Johann figured out that when the sun shone on photographic paper, it would turn from white to gray. This happened because photographic paper has a coat of white silver chloride that reacts with light to gray metallic silver. So Johann took a prism, separated sunlight into different wavelengths, and directed it at a photographic paper. And what he noticed was that the paper turned gray much faster in this invisible part of the spectrum right next to the violet end. He called this invisible light chemical rays, which today we know as ultraviolet radiation. 75 years later, two English dudes, Thomas Blunt and Arthur Downes, figured out that sunlight was very good at killing bacteria. More importantly, that it wasn't just the heat of the sun that killed bacteria, but that the wavelength of light had something to do with it. In their experiments, they noticed that purple and the ultraviolet parts of the spectrum were most effective at destroying bacteria. Following this was Robert Koch's discovery in 1882 that tuberculosis, which was kind of a big problem in the late 19th century, was caused by a bacterium and that it could be killed with direct sunlight. And finally, the cherry on top that set the stage for a new era of medical sun therapy was Neil Finzen's invention of artificial sun lamps. He designed carbon arc lamps that produced very bright light, including ultraviolet. Obviously, UV lamps were kind of dangerous, but Finzen realized that if he concentrated the UV rays on an area of the skin, he could successfully treat skin tuberculosis. And this was a big deal in the pre-antibiotic era, where there was no safe way to treat bacterial infections. For his invention of light therapy, Finzen was awarded a Nobel Prize. So by this point, sunlight, and especially UV light, was seen in the medical field as having incredible healing properties. Sanitariums, or hospitals that offered heliotherapy, became a popular treatment recommended by doctors. Heliotherapy basically just meant going to a hospital where you can lounge in the fresh air and sit in the sun. I think it's easy to laugh at the crazy doctor recommendations of the early 20th century. Like, hi doctor, I have tuberculosis. And the doctor is like, well, how about you just get some fresh air and sit in the sun for a week? And don't get me wrong, I love to have a good laugh at quack stuff from the past. But I think we shouldn't forget one very important, guiding thought from this time. And that is the overpowering faith in science and technology to solve problems. So even if innovative treatments weren't vetted or tested, people and doctors were fascinated by their potential and were willing to try them regardless. So this enthusiasm around sun therapy and tanning even extended to babies. A 1926 article in the American Journal of Public Health read, "We have found that the best results are obtained by telling mothers that they must get their children sunburned. The infant should be taken out on bright days for a time between the hours of 11 a.m. and 2 p.m., and the sun allowed to shine directly on its face. The amount of tanning or sunburn may be taken as a rough estimate of the effectiveness of the treatment." Yikes. Okay, enough with the nerdy stuff. Let's get back to the fun stuff. And by fun stuff, I mean the fascination of the public with a potential new cure-all, complete lack of safety regulations, and hyped up promises by a bunch of charlatans. What could possibly go wrong? Part 3. The Bronze Age. At the same time as doctors were promoting sun exposure as a cure for diseases, fashion was moving away from long-sleeved and high-necked blouses and dresses that emphasized modesty to short dresses made out of lighter fabrics that revealed more skin. Swimwear also went from dresses, parasols, and socks in 1920 to wide-brimmed hats and caftans, which were all ditched for skimpy bodysuits by the 1930s. Clothes for women that allowed freedom of movement were also popular in the 1920s, because sports weren't just men's business anymore. So by the 1930s, the tan became a sign of well-being and attractiveness. These beliefs gave birth to a new market for artificial sources of sunlight, first for clinics and then for the home. We could say that these early sun lamps were precursors to tanning salons, but they were actually very inefficient at producing a tan. Early sun lamps were small, and they were more likely to cause eye injuries or burns than give you a full-body tan. General Electric was one of many companies that capitalized on the medical support of sun exposure. For example, in a 1932 advertisement, they promoted UV lamps to bask in the health-protecting ultraviolet rays while you read, play bridge, or bathe. Give children ultraviolet radiation in their playrooms. Yikes. I'm going to be saying yikes a lot in this video. Also, the director of the General Electric Lighting Research Laboratory, Matthew Lukiash, also said at the time that in the future we shall sleep in beds shaped as covered wagons, and instead of pajamas, we shall have ultraviolet light rays pouring down on us as we sleep, producing the effect of reposing on a sunlit meadow in a tropical land. Don't you just love reading these glamorized predictions of the future? Like, in the future, we're gonna sleep in sun pods and it's gonna feel like laying on a beautiful meadow, when in reality, we're like watching presidents play Minecraft with AI voices, and the planet is on fire. Part 4. Suntans for sale. Moving ahead to the 1950s, traveling was becoming much cheaper and was now affordable not just to the elites, but also to the middle class. And so, it's no surprise that a suntan became a valued souvenir that you could bring back from a vacation. Delta even advertised their Miami flight as the Suntan Special. Another notable development of the 60s was a new genre of Hollywood movies that glorified the beach, the bikini, and the tan, the so-called beach party movie. Starting with 1959's Gidget, the beach party movie quickly gained mass appeal with huge box office hits like Beach Party, Muscle Beach Party, and Bikini Beach. These movies featured young, tanned, and toned men and women, and the plot was usually some kind of romance story on the beach. I just wonder what the love can bring. The travel industry boom and the rise of the tan as a status symbol set the stage for two powerful industries to emerge: the indoor tanning industry and the sunscreen industry. It may seem logical to think that these two industries are against each other because they seem to be promoting opposite things, but these two industries were actually best pals. They were both promoting sun exposure and feeding into the idea of the tan as attractive. Sunscreen companies promoted the safe tan myth and sold products that would help you get a deeper, darker tan without burning. Up until the late 70s, sunscreens contained little to no sun protective ingredients and were mostly just baby oil and cocoa butter. The first indoor tanning salon was opened in 1978 in Searcy, Arkansas, by a company named Tannerific, with only 3 stand-up tanning booths. By 1980, around 1,000 tanning salons were operating in the United States. One myth that the tanning salon companies came up with was that their lamps are totally safe because they only produce UVA light, unlike the sun, which also produces UVB. Okay, I guess it's time for some science again. Let's talk about the UV ABCs. The A, B, and C are just used to talk about different parts or wavelengths of the UV spectrum. UVA, with the longest wavelength, penetrates deep into the skin and is mostly responsible for tanning and aging. UVA is the reason why you should wear sunscreen when it's cloudy or in the winter, because clouds can't filter it out. UVB, on the other hand, affects the skin's top layer and is strongest during the summer. UVB is also what directly causes sunburns and skin cancer because it is easily absorbed by DNA. And finally, UVC is kind of irrelevant because it's mostly absorbed by the ozone layer, but we do produce it artificially in disinfectant lamps, welding torches, and lasers. Part 5. Sun damage warnings. The thing that surprised me most while researching for this video was that UV radiation was known to be a cause of cancer since as early as 1928, when 2 studies showed that it causes skin cancer in mice. And in 1936, the American Journal of Public Health published their position on sun exposure, saying that, as far as is known, man actually requires only a relatively small amount of sunshine for the maintenance of normal health, and the greatest danger, perhaps at the present time, lies in too much exposure to sunlight rather than too little. But even if this information had somehow reached the public, it probably wouldn't have made much of a difference because of the insane amount of media attention focused on the benefits of sunbathing. So maybe at this point you want to accuse me of being a sun hater. Before you do that, I just want to say that yes, that is actually completely accurate, but my personal sunbathing convictions have nothing to do with how bad this sunbathing trend was for society. In the 1930s, melanoma, or the most lethal form of skin cancer, was super rare, with a lifetime risk of 1 in 1,500 people. But by the 1980s, that risk increased to 1 in 150 people with white skin. The response to this public health crisis was intense campaigning in the 80s and 90s to educate the public about sun safety. For example, the American Cancer Society launched their Fry Now, Pay Later campaign, saying there is a proven connection between sun exposure and skin cancer, as well as premature wrinkling. Since the 90s, there has been a trend towards more hats, sunscreen ads, and sun awareness articles in fashion magazines. But tans were still being glorified in popular culture. Shows like Miami Vice and, of course, Baywatch all eroticized tanned skin, especially on women. And this association of attractiveness with a tan is what the indoor tanning industry is still holding on to this day. They're basically like, hey, yeah, we know that tanning is kind of not that good for your skin and it makes your skin age faster and stuff, but hey, it also makes you look healthy and beautiful. And the myth of the safe tan is still being written about in magazines. Like Cosmopolitan literally wrote an article 2 weeks ago that's titled 10 Tips for Getting the Best Suntan Safely. So why is there no such thing as a safe tan? Well, it all comes down to a protein called melanin. Melanin acts as a kind of natural sunscreen in our skin that absorbs UV radiation and prevents DNA damage. However, because some of the UV radiation isn't absorbed by the melanin and still manages to get into your skin and damage DNA, your body has kind of a protective mechanism to produce more melanin in order to prevent further damage. Therefore, a tan is the direct result of DNA damage. So a base tan is literally just damaging your skin now so that you can damage it even more in the future. So what's the attitude on tanning today? While tanning may not be as popular as it was during its heyday in the 60s and 70s, myths around sun protection are still very much alive. In a 2022 survey of 17,000 Europeans, 59% said that they believe a tan is healthy, 73% that they found a tan attractive. And I think this really shows how entrenched our culture is in this healthy suntan myth. But I do feel like these attitudes are slowly changing. Amongst my friends who have been arguably brainwashed by me with sunscreen advocacy, nobody goes to tanning salons, not even to get a spray tan. And sitting in the sun for too long and getting sunburned or even getting a visible tan is seen as kind of irresponsible. I live in Western Europe, by the way, and I'd love to hear what the attitudes are like around tanning in your country. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next one.